Snuggle and Play dress is inspired by my rambunctious 3-year-old Mariana, who wants to get dressed all by herself, but also loves playing in dresses. So the top is more like a simple sweatshirt style, but with special embroidery on the front, and then the bottom is just a simple woven skirt. The first dress that I made was with a sweatshirt material on the top, and the Janome embroidery can go through just about any material, so don't worry about that. Your PDF is going to explain exactly the amount of materials you'll need for the top and the skirt. To do the embroidery on the machine, choose whatever colors you desire, and depending on how many colors your particular design has. I'm going to be doing a pretty little butterfly design with 3 different colors of embroidery thread that actually match back to the fabric on the bottom. The first dress I did used this sweatshirt material, which works out really well, but this time I think I'm going to do more of a simple t-shirt knit, and one that coordinates really beautiful with this pretty Liberty of London print here. I also have some really pretty shades of embroidery thread to choose from to coordinate with that Liberty of London fabric. And also I'm going to choose 3 of them because I'm going to do this pretty interlocking butterfly design that has 3 different colors. The embroidery design that I chose on the Skyline S9 is going to use the hoop 20. So I've got that ready to go. I also have some stabilizer that I'm going to put behind my fabric. You'll also want your basic sewing supplies. So I have my straight pins, my thread snips, and some marking tools. I also have my cutting mat and my rotary cutter to cut out the very simple pattern shapes. And you'll want to choose some machine sewing thread just to coordinate with your fabrics. Before we get started on embroidery, I want to give you a couple of tips to consider when embroidering on a piece of fabric that will become the part of a garment. You want to first embroider but not cut out your pattern shape yet. Although in this case, we're going to want to center the design on that bodice front. So I'm going to use my chalk pencil just to mark it out on the fabric. Now you'll notice I don't have it pushed all the way up here. I've got it kind of a little bit more down here so that I have a nice border of fabric all the way around, and that correlates with the size hoop that I'm using right here. I want the fabric to be able to extend past the hoop on all sides when I go to embroider it. So I'm giving it a little bit of a border here. But I'm just going to mark with my chalk. I'm just going to do a light pencil or chalk line around here to get that pattern shape in. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're not going to necessarily cut on these lines later. This just gives you an idea as you're hooping the fabric. Now to get it really nice and centered, you'll need to pay attention to these center marks here at the top and the bottom. And I'm making chalk marks at both sides. And even though this extends beyond the pattern, that's okay. That's going to help me line up the center of my pattern shape in the embroidery hoop with this fancy little grid overlay. It helps you center your fabric. So now I'm going to include this material in the hooping process. I'm taking out the top hoop, and I'm going to layer the stabilizer right on top of the lower hoop, and the fabric comes next, which for right now you can just sort of eyeball the center of that. And then I'm just going to loosely lay the top hoop over it. And even these markings here, these little ridges on the top hoop, can point out where the center is. We're pretty close. I'm just going to scoot it over a little bit. But I'm also going to use this grid to help me line everything up. Now, another consideration, of course, is also how high or low you want the embroidery to sit. So this center mark here and these side centering marks are going to help you with that. I love the Skyline S9 because it is so simple to switch from regular sewing to embroidery. Notice that the design is oriented sideways to fit in the hoop, so I also have my pattern shape oriented sideways in the hoop to embroider it just where I want it. Now that we've embroidered these pretty little trio of butterflies across the front of the fabric, it's time to take our sewing pattern pieces and cut out that bodice piece. I've retraced mine on some Swedish tracing paper, which I really like because you can kind of see through it, but it's also easy to work with and it doesn't crease like paper does. I can still just barely see the chalk line of this pattern shape from before the embroidery, but I could definitely still see my center lines. So I can place the pattern. But if there has been any shifting in your embroidery, take a really good look at where the embroidery ended up, because now's your chance to make sure you have it centered where you want it. And I think this looks really good because that chalk line will go away. So if you need to shift it in one direction or another to get the embroidery where you want it, go ahead and do that now. I'm just going to use my rotary to cut around this shape. That's another thing I like about the Swedish tracing paper is it has a little bit of a fabric-y feel to it. So it kind of grips onto your material and doesn't slide around like tracing paper might. You also have pattern pieces for the bodice back and also the sleeve. So you'll cut one bodice back from the same material, or different if you want to mix it up. And then you're also going to cut out 2 sleeves. So you have the 3 pattern pieces, but in addition to that, your downloadable pattern PDF is going to specify which size rectangle to cut for the neckband and also for the skirt pieces. Now that we have all of our pieces cut, it's time to assemble the top together. So I'm just going to be working with the knit fabrics first. And the sleeve piece is the only one that I really want you to pay attention to in terms of which is front and which is back, because they're shaped just a little bit differently. The sleeve piece is the only one that's not perfectly symmetrical. You can see there's a front edge marked and a back edge marked. These are the edges that connect to the front and back pieces. So I'm just going to mark the fronts with pins so that I remember. So in terms of assembly, the front is connected to the back by way of the sleeves. So I'm going to lay it all out here in a way that helps you visualize it. If your fabric has a right and wrong side, make sure that you've got the right side of the back and the right side of the front facing up. And these are my sleeve pieces. And I've got the right sides facing up right now. And this would be the correct orientation because remember, I pin marked the front edge of those sleeves. But I'm going to lay them right sides together now with the front matching up those edges and then pinning together. And now I'm going to do the same on the other side, right sides together. The assembly seams in this dress are done with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to do that now, sewing from the underarm up to the neckline, and then from the neckline down to the underarm on the other side. Now that we've got the front sewn to the sleeves, it's time to do the same with the back. So you see I had it laid out here, oriented well, but we need to turn right sides together. And we're going to match these edges and pin. I'm going to carry this other sleeve edge over. Okay, now I'm going to sew those seams just the way I did to the front. So now that we have that put together, it's time to put front and back together with the right sides facing. And we're going to do the underarm and the side seam all in one pass by starting here, sewing until we reach that shoulder seam, and then continuing down the side seam. But before I do that, I'm going to press these seams open here. Another great feature on this S9 is that I can set a default so the presser foot automatically raises as soon as I'm done with my seam, which makes doing a pivot turn completely hands-free. After I sewed the underarm edges, I also clipped out some of the excess in the underarm there and pressed it open, both the sleeve and the side seam, so that it all lays nice and smooth. The next step is attach the neckband. Your pattern PDF is going to specify the exact size length of strip to cut depending on what size garment you're making. Then you'll need to fold that long